I'm going to talk about Virtual Wisdom Analytics Platform. Before I do so, though, I wanted to kind of set the stage for the environment that Virtual Wisdom sits in. I had this slide, it's the promise of the hybrid cloud. Now, how many of you guys are familiar with the hybrid cloud? Pretty much everybody.
Depends on your definition of hybrid.
Exactly, and
Is
that's
it hybrid or
Hybrid
multi?
and cloud,
Are
you
you
have to define both of them.
are you
Exactly.
are you on-prem, off-prem, multi hybrid, or are you public cloud hybrid, or are you? Yeah.
I can tell you what I'm starting to see in talking to a lot of customers. I was just up talking to a customer up in Leeds yesterday. The hybrid cloud, what it means to them is applications that, I'll use the word legacy, on-prem. They're the crown jewels of the company. They're not moving. But they are considering next-gen applications being developed on the public cloud. Interestingly enough, the customer I was speaking to yesterday, their version of the public cloud was having a third party host it. Not necessarily public like AWS or Azure. So there are different permutations of this, but the outcome and what they're trying to achieve around cost optimization, around efficiencies is the same.
From the multi-cloud point of view, hybrid cloud is multi-cloud, and people have got, they may not have that many internal clouds, but most people have got lots of external clouds, and most of them have got more than they think.
Certainly, and those disparate systems are what adds complexity. And that's exactly where we want to make sure we're positioned for, is being able to handle that complexity and ease this transition as they move forward.
Actually, just talking on that particular customer that Phil was with, so they run their own data center in-house. So you say, okay, so it's an on-prem system. However, they've made a load of acquisitions over the past few years, and they're providing IT services to those acquired companies. Those acquired companies think that they have a cloud provider. It's the same system. It's just two different views of the same system.
Very good, thanks, Chris. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about, I want to kind of go back and look at where Virtual Wisdom has evolved in the last 12 to 18 months. It started out as a fiber channel monitoring tool. Back in 2012, when I joined the company, that's what we had in place. It was very good at monitoring the ESX, the AIX, the Hyper-V systems, monitoring the SAN fabric, whether it be Brocade or Cisco. And the company was founded from sort of the hardware probe, which looked at every single transaction on the fiber channel wire. That's where we were, and we were really good at it. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we've expanded our footprint. We're now in the IP network. We're monitoring IP flows using NetFlow, for example. We want to be able to see the application conversations as they happen from VM to VM, not just the database application talking to the fiber channel storage in the back end. So we wanted to be able to see that full picture. We also built another hardware probe to be able to look at that high fidelity NFS, SMB, and iSCSI traffic that's going there. So breadth and depth is important to being able to see the complete picture. We didn't stop there. As you guys have seen, things like hyperconverged has become very popular. So we went out and made sure we integrated with Scale.io, with vSAN. And by the way, the solution that Virtual Wisdom comes out with is not one of those ones that you look at from a company that's just providing integrations and providing metrics. We actually go the extra mile to make sure that whatever entities we discover in those different environments, that we understand the context and we join it together. So an IP flow that we see, for example, in Scale.io, we bind it with the NetFlow data we see, and it's all one piece, one view for the customer. And lastly, going back to that hybrid cloud, we want to be able to provide a single pane of glass for customers who have opted to go and monitor and have applications deployed in the cloud, as well as on-prem. And so we have a novel approach to our monitoring of the public cloud as well. And I'll go into more detail on some of these as well. But the key takeaway here is we wanted to make sure there was no blind spots, and we wanted to make sure we provided a single pane of glass for customers. Okay, so I mentioned how the platform's evolved quite a bit. over the last 12 to 18 months. One of the ultimate goals of where we need to be, as you add more and more complexity, as customers have larger and larger data centers and disparate systems, we need to be the brain behind the orchestrated data center. What does that mean? That means autonomous control of balancing workloads in the hybrid data center to avoid contention. That means proactive capacity planning. And it means absolutely zero outages. That's where we're going. And that's what our vision has been charted out. That's every feature we develop is in support of that vision from a company perspective. How do we get there? So I want to talk a little bit about what we built today in support of this vision and where we're going to achieve this vision. So number one, the breadth of data. An analytics platform is only as good as the data it sees. It needs you can't have a blind spot. Otherwise, you can't provide the right answer, the right solution. So, IP network, fiber channel, iSCSI, cloud, public and private. We're going to cover all of them. Depth of data is important as well. What happens in a millisecond, what happens in a second is extremely important. If you're summarizing data to a minute, to an hour, you lose important information. We need to have both of those. So an analytics platform needs depth and breadth of information. It needs context of data. I think the most important thing is that I can piece together the entire picture from the data. So I'm not discovering an IP address from this piece of hardware, this third-party device, and another IP address over here. I need to merge those together so I can see the whole picture together. And lastly, and this is a net new area of the product that we're introducing in 6.0, the nature of the data. Virtual Wisdom has historically been a time series company. That means metrics over time. And you can do a ton of analytics on metrics over time, but it's just one dimension of the problem. What if I could overlay that with events to help paint a more complete picture? And so we've introduced event aggregation on top of the time series information to be able to give you a complete picture. And I'll give you one example. One of the first ones we introduced was an integration with AppDynamics to be able to pull their critical events. And one of the questions that we've never been able to answer, you can see a spike in response time from a VI perspective, and we couldn't tell you if the application felt pain or not. We could just tell you that it experienced a response time glitch. Now we can tell you. We can say AppDynamics actually fired an alarm that it's unhappy. So that's actually an important blip that you're looking at right now. Painting that picture is going to be exceptionally important. So we set the foundation for ourselves to continue to expand in that direction. The second layer on top of that, once you have the data layer, and we're continuing to build out in that direction, you can do interesting things. Like, for example, you can automate your alerting based on the SLAs. And I'm going to go into that just a little bit more later. You can build purpose-built machine learning-based analytics to help solve point problems. And you can automate investigations. You can create heuristics. You can learn from other customers and what they're doing to fix problems, build a model and deploy it to other customers. So you can start to do some very interesting things with machine learning and automation. And then once you have that foundation, and by the way, this is where we're at today. This is where VW 6.0 is today. And so going forward, we are going to work on being that brain behind the orchestrated data center. That doesn't mean we're going to be an orchestrator. Quite the contrary. We want to be the brain behind it and feed the orchestration tools that a customer might have, whether that be ServiceNow, vCenter, Puppet, or Chef, whatever they might want to use. We want to be able to provide that format to them so that they can react to their environment, and we can provide the useful insights on what they should be doing. And then after we provide a suggestion on how to work around a problem or how to avoid a problem altogether, we want to be able to measure that change and report that back to the customer. We asked you, Mr. Customer, to move these 5 VMs to balance the cluster because we started to see contention in CPU. We should be able to monitor that and say, yeah, I did see the CPU contention reduce. And lastly, and this is the holy grail, crowdsourced machine learning is one implementation of what you can do with this types of information. And I'll give you a couple interesting use cases. This is still in the discovery phase from an engineering perspective, but one, wouldn't it be interesting if, for example, if we saw, for example, a firmware update to a storage array, and we saw response time to that storage array since that firmware update decreased by 20%. If I see one customer, if that happens, that's interesting. If I see 10 customers who've deployed that firmware and we see 20%, that's interesting insights that we can pass down to the customer. We can say, these are the things we're seeing. And again, it comes down to understanding events and time series information to be able to paint that picture. It also requires us pulling that metadata off into a cloud where our own analytics database, where we can then build models, train those models, learn things, and push those down to our customers. That's just one example. There's hundreds of things that we're thinking about right now in that space. So I wanted to quickly go through the platform's capabilities as it is today, or as it will be in 6.0 here in about the next 4 to 6 weeks. Breadth and depth of data. I think I've talked at length about that. That's essential. We are going to continue to build integrations to as many things as we can, because again, blind spots are absolutely a problem if we're trying to paint the full picture for the customer. This is an area that has been a significant investment area in the last 12 to 18 months. Application discovery. VW has historically been able to speak in the context of an ESX host, a VM, a storage port, a switch port. Very good at telling customers, hey, your VM's response time took a hit. But what was lacking is putting a face to that data. What's running on that VM? Is it a tier 3 application I really don't care about? Is it a backup that takes a little bit longer, probably not a problem? Or is it my business critical application running on that VM? And so we've spent a lot of time building heuristics, integrating with things like AppDynamics, APM tools, to be able to get the app topology, pull that into our system, and be able to build that application view and tie it into the infrastructure. And I think that's exceptionally important to putting a face to the data. And we go beyond that. So there are integrations. I mentioned AppDynamics. Dynatrace is coming out. ServiceNow is another one where we can actually pull the tier of the application. So we'll know if it's a tier 0, if it's a tier 1, a tier 2. And what we can do with that is we can set alarms on those infrastructure pieces. Best practice alarms. Customer doesn't have to lift a finger. They're using 10 plus years of our experience in setting those threshold alarms. And we're setting those on the infrastructure for them. Now, when that V motions to a different location, so do those thresholds. Obviously, a tier 0 is going to have a tighter threshold, different alarms than a tier 3. And so, completely dynamic alarming on that front, based on the tier. We've also, with all this data, with event and time series data, with all the disparate different systems out there, nobody wants to spend all day in Virtual Wisdom. They want to be able to glance at a dashboard and pull out the insights that are important. What should I be looking at? And that's exactly what we spend a lot of time. We have tens, if not almost 50 different template reports and dashboards that a customer can configure. Everything from the CIO dashboard that talks about, here's your applications that are tier 0, and you can see what the color of them is, and I'll show a demo of this, to just a couple snapshots of tier 0 infrastructure and what are the areas that are problematic and what are okay. And so it's at a glance, everything from the CIO all the way down to the storage admin, being able to see from their perspective what's important. Guided and automated investigations. Again, we took the 10 plus years of professional service engagements that we've been doing. We took all of that knowledge and we baked it directly into the product. So what that means is if I have an alert on a VM and it's a CPU contention issue, I'm going to go ahead and run the analytics to figure out what the root cause is, and I'm going to run the analytics that are going to tell me how do I remediate that. I'm going to put all that into the investigation right there in the case, and I'm going to tell the customer, here's the problem we found, here's how you solve it, and in one example, we even have the script you can run to go ahead and move those things around. So again, getting us closer to the brain behind the orchestrated data center. We have it today. Capacity management, this is a brand new product area in the platform today. And this is one that, again, part of the 6.0 release, which I'll talk a little bit more about. It's the ability to not just see performance, but the other side of that coin is capacity management. And so we've done a fantastic job both on the analytics side in that space as well as calculating our own metrics, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. And lastly, all of the insights built and driven by our purpose-built analytics. That's the platform that we have today. So I just wanted to kind of level set before we start talking about some of the things coming in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So before I go into that, just to kind of look at the closed loop data center, what does that mean? It means identifying a problem, finding the root cause, and coming up with the remediation automatically, and then feeding that orchestration tool. Where do we stand today? We have purpose-built analytics that fit all those buckets. So we have Event Advisor. I can find a spike or something that looks abnormal. We have seasonal trends, so using machine learning to understand what is a business pattern that is normal. That's your baseline. And then measuring standard deviations from that baseline. Balance Finder for looking at the fabric and the network. Trend Matcher. Again, I'll go into some more of these later, but the key point in all of these is we have analytics already built today to feed that orchestration. So what are we coming out with Virtual Wisdom 6? We're coming out with proactive dashboards. And a big ask from the customers has been, the dashboards look great, they're very insightful, but all of those analytic outputs that you run in the background, I'm not seeing them unless I drill into the product. So we've elevated those out, we brought them to the forefront. So you'll see, for example, in one of the examples, you can see there's a CPU contention, and then we have an analytic right below it that says, move these 5 VMs. And so it's right there front and center. Capacity reporting, we now pull capacity information from vSphere. We also calculate our own percentiles, and I'll show you just a little bit later why that's actually important, and that takes capacity management to the next level. We added a capacity forecast analytic, or a time to zero, as well as made some significant trend matcher enhancements, which I'll showcase a bit here later. Automated investigations, topology views. We've invested heavily in being able to build a map of your infrastructure and look at it from whatever lens you want to. If I have a vSAN, I want to look at it from that lens, and I want to see the various different components. If it's a fiber channel backend, I'm gonna build a purpose-built topology for you that focuses on that. So we allow you to see it from whatever angle you want to see it in. And then our promise of being able to have no blind spots, we continue to add integrations. And so Dynatrace, App Dynamic Events, we monitor AWS and Azure Cloud and operating system through operating system monitoring. So the operating system monitoring can handle both the public cloud, and that's sort of our novel way of addressing this, as well as the private cloud by talking directly to the operating system and pulling metrics. Vmax and SVC from the storage edge. And we offered another way of discovering your fabric. Besides going to BNA, we offer another yet for customers who do not have BNA, they can use our way of discovering Brocade fabrics using SNMP and SSH. And lastly, we added more depth of monitoring. So our probe NAS used to just support NFS and SMB. We added iSCSI. I guess I'll pause there for a second. Any questions?
So you're moving from this using the network as a data source for monitoring storage performance, which is where you've historically come from. You're moving up the food chain now into data center monitoring and reporting. That's where you are today. And now what you're announcing is you're going to continue to enhance that capability. I think in networking, we would call you an intent-based networking. That is, you can automatically derive intent from what's happening on the network and drive configuration in the engines.
That's absolutely right. And we're not abandoning by any means. If you notice, we're doubling down on the infrastructure as well, but we are moving up stack. Yeah. We want the full picture from the application and what it sees all the way in.
Because you still need the infrastructure to tie to the your new relic, as you say, App Dynamics and so forth. There, you need to correlate the data that App Dynamics tells you you've got a hiccup. Was it infrastructure or was it not?
Exactly.
Was it because your Java, crapped out again, or was it because your, storage array in the data center or your network had a flap in the spanning tree or whatever?
Absolutely.
So actually, that's quite an important area to talk about, because if you look at New Relic or AppDynamics or Dynatrace or whatever, what they're looking at is the application performance from the end user really to the top of the infrastructure.
Mm.
So they go to the hypervisor, but anything below that
Yeah.
is a black box.
Yes.
So what we're doing is working with them to give that full end-to-end view.
Right.
Where this is very different is if you look at those tools, you think, ours is expensive, theirs are really expensive. And so they tend to be rolled out in just a single application. So
Yes.
tier 0, tier 1 app.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have in the infrastructure something that's sitting on, like a tier 3 application that's running a batch job that's on a shared infrastructure. And it's impacting the tier 1 stuff. AppDynamics, Dynatrace, New Relic can't see that.
No.
They just say there's a slowdown somewhere. And so the same thing is happening. So these things on the right here,
Yep.
where you're looking at AWS, Azure, that stuff, you can have an impact coming in from those things.
But your key data collection point is the network.
Um,
Or
well-
are you extending your data collection into hosts and
Exactly.
yeah.
So I just elaborate just a bit more on that. When we say operating system monitoring, that is how we monitor the cloud.
an agent?
Exactly. It's not an agent based. It's SSH or WMI
Right.
into those host devices and pulling out some
Okay.
topology information as well as metrics.
Yeah.
And that gives us, especially if a customer wants to say, I have an application running right now. I'm getting host-based monitoring through your OS probe, and I want to move that to AWS. It gives you a continuity of how is it performing, and now that I moved it compared to how it was performing when it was on-prem.
So that again is important, because if you go to AWS, you get a set of reporting tools that come with that. Think Apple. You then go to Azure. You get another set of reporting tools. Think Orange, and you're trying to correlate this with how it has been performing on-prem. Think Banana. So you've got these completely disparate things that you're trying to pull together. So actually one of the values of this is just giving you that single view of everything. So you can say, okay, we're getting 3 milliseconds response time off AWS, we're getting 4 milliseconds off Azure, we're getting 2.5 milliseconds on-prem. Now let's discuss migration. Sorry, you had it.
I did, and maybe this is unfair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. To what degree, if any, do your analytics look at things like revision levels on code and firmware and BIOSes and all that fun stuff to determine if there is a trend going on? And maybe that's what you were referring to with your future stuff, but literally every Tuesday, data center behavior can change.
You're spot on. And that's exactly where we want to go. We have that information. We need to actually start to bring it to bear, right? And start leveraging it from an analytics perspective. Because, as you pointed out, every time software gets updated, the workload profile changes, right? So if I update a tier 3 software, even though it may not affect the tier 3, that workload changed. And maybe that now impacts your tier 0 that's running on a shared storage array.
I'd go and talk to Microsoft about their experience of using telemetry and feedback and getting it completely wrong and how they interpret the data. This is incredibly difficult to do.
The key part here is, and this is where I think we're still exploring, by the way, so we're still new to this, but it's change-based analytics. I can see there's a problem on my tier 0. I can see response time ticked up a little bit. Let me go retroactively find out what changed. And let's be smart about it. Let's see what in that topology changed. And then go back there and see if there's a correlation.
There's a lot about not being a slave purely to the data, but also to look at very subtle patterns, because it's often the subtle patterns that you have to look after, not some of the other ones.
Absolutely.
Because you're dealing with big symptoms rather than the actual cause somewhere else.
Yep, absolutely.
There's always two problems with intent-based systems. One is the data that you're collecting drives your ML, your decision engine, however your decision engine looks. Usually involves graph databases and blah. We can have lots of lovely debates about in-memory graph databases and stuff. But the other one is then how do you extract meaningful data from that? So if you talk to people who built these systems, just how you correlate that data. You have to have a machine learning environment over time.
Mhm.
But for today, you can just pattern match. You can do some fairly linear regression or statistical regression and get some fairly, if this, then this, then this, then this, you can add value and then over time iterate forward. So he's pitching a vision as much as he's pitching a product.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So I want to do a couple deep dives into the big rocks that we have on this list here, and then I'll demo a few of these. One of the first ones, and I wanted to kind of show what that looked like, is the AppDynamics events overlaying on top of, say, a response time glitch. And here you can see we had a response time glitch. Actually, this is a CPU utilization and a memory utilization glitch, and AppDynamics is absolutely not happy. Just fired a critical alarm that we went and pulled and overlaid right on top of the graph. So that's a step one for us in being able to leverage those events. Next up, and Trend Matcher is not a new analytic for us. We've had this since 2013 when we launched VW 4.0. We had a version 1 of it. We've significantly enhanced it because it is absolutely at the core of finding the root cause and who else is impacted in a system. And so let me walk you through just a few of the changes we made here. So number one, what is a trend matcher? And you can actually say it three different ways. It means that a different entity with data that looks similar to the base trend, or if you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, you could say a different entity with data highly correlated to the base trend. And if you want to say it a different way, you can say a different entity with data that has been pattern matched to the base. So it's kind of just those regressions and those curve fitting algorithms to find out what's matching. What have we changed?
So you've got a trend and you're looking for another trend that matches.
That's right, over the same period of time.
Yeah.
And what we do is, and this is sort of where we've enhanced things just a bit, it's topology aware. So we're not going to go across your entire infrastructure and look at everything, because if a storage array doesn't talk to that thing, and the storage array is the one that's having the glitch, the base trend, why look at it? It's just going to confuse and the user or the customer. So what we do is we're intelligent about it, and we just essentially traverse depth and breadth across the graph, and we have that complete graph picture. And I'll give you an example of what you could pull out of Virtual Wisdom today to kind of show what our graph looks like. And it's everything from the host to the HBA to the port, if you're talking host side, and you could pretty much do that for every component we have in the system. This is actually something that we learned over time. A lot of times you'll have, for example, the noisy neighbor, and you'll have a tier 3 application all of a sudden got bursty, sucked up all the resources from my storage array. And you can easily match that because it's a single thing caused a single event. But what if it's 3 things, 4 things acting in concert? 3 or 4 VMs, for example, that got bursty and chatty at the same time, and because they got chatty at the same time, they're the ones that cause your problems. In Trend Matcher Part 1, we wouldn't have caught that. In Trend Matcher Part 2 now, we do multi-match. So we will overlay events at the same period of time to see if now does that fit a curve. And again, using the data in different ways to provide some useful insights. And this is another interesting one that, again, we've learned over the years in doing analysis. It's called negative correlation. So the positive correlation is the intuitive one. And you could say when temperatures go up, ice cream sales go up. And in the data center parlance, you could say when a CPU utilization goes up, memory utilization goes up. That makes sense. But negative correlations are also interesting. So if you were to say when temperatures go down, sweater sales go up, sure, that makes sense, but I wouldn't have probably thought about that one. But in the data center, you would say when disk writes rate go up, CPU utilization goes down. And there's these different, I'm just giving you one example, but there's these interesting things that once you do these negative correlations, you start to pull out more insights. And so we're also providing negative correlations as well. That's all I had to share in the Trend Matcher enhancements. I'm going to pop over to the capacity management next because there's several things I wanted to share here. We don't calculate just a single number. When we get something, so we get capacity information from pretty much all of the components we talk to in the data center. They're going to provide us some level of utilization that's happening. What we do with that utilization number is then we turn that to capacity information. And what that means is instead of capturing one number and storing it and allowing it to get aggregated over time, we calculate percentiles. We calculate the max, the 95th percentile, 75th percentile. And let me give you an example of why we do this. We had one customer who had a weird feature request. He said, I want to be able to dump your 1 second data to a file, and I want to be able to do that constantly. I was like, well, that's a weird feature. Why would you ever want that amount of data? It's just, you crash your Excel program trying to capture all that data. And he said, because I need to know what the max is and calculate my own max, because you don't do it. Because I need to be able to do capacity planning, and the max is important to me. And so we took that feedback and said, how about if we calculated the max and we persisted that forever, and we gave you that information instead of sending you gobs of data where you have to do it yourself. And that was exactly the use case they were after. Some customers are happy with 95th percentile. So in order to appease a lot of the different use cases, we went ahead and captured all of these. Why are we different than anybody else? Let me give you a use case. If you were to have a blip, let's say 170 megabits per second of utilization, if I capture that metric and I start to aggregate it over time, it's going to aggregate to a lower number, right? It's going to be eventually averaged out to about 15 megabits. That's not accurate. That doesn't help me plan capacity. And so we tackled this a very different way. When we see that 170 megabits per second, every hour, using the lowest granularity of data before it gets aged out, we will go ahead and store that 170 megabytes of data. We'll calculate the max. We'll calculate the 95th percentile, and we persist it indefinitely. So better approach to capacity management to give our customers the insights that they absolutely need. And that's the end of the deck that I have. I did have a bit of a demo that I wanted to share with you guys, just to kind of show you the product. But before I jump over there, can I answer any additional questions?
So why would a company buy this product that's basically my question.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of historical reasons why we've entered customers' environments. A lot of the times, and I'll give you an example from my past, and this goes to the troubleshooting side. I used to work for a storage company on the East Coast. You guys can probably figure out who that was. Many, many years ago. And I was a developer, and then I turned it as a manager. I used to get calls in the middle of the night saying, it's gone through all the levels of support, and they can't figure out the problem. They call engineering. I pick up the phone, and we spent hours. And I actually was on a phone call with one bank customer. He said, I'm losing $1 million an hour. My ATMs are down.
Yeah.
Please help me. And I'm just going to finish building this story just a bit here. I looked at the problem, and I proved it wasn't the storage array. Now, I was able to go back to bed. My team was able to go back to bed, but that customer's not any happier.
Yeah.
And now I told him to go talk to VMware and Brocade because that was the other components. And he still has a problem.
Yeah.
That complete end-to-end visibility when things go wrong is exceptionally important. Now I'm going to go one step further. What if you could avoid those problems altogether? And I have customers who have said, since I've deployed Virtual Wisdom, we have had no outages. Now, there are gray areas where things start to get bad, but I caught them there.
Yeah.
And I was able to remediate.
So actually, just taking that a little bit further, some figures. So there's a reasonably large online trading company in the States called PayPal. They monitor every single port in their environment. Their online system costs them $75,000 per second if that goes down. They were saying, and the last time we were talking earlier this year, they said that a 4 millisecond latency in one of their online apps costs them about 1.6 billion over the year.
Really?
Yeah. So why would you buy this product? To stop that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But your average customer is like the bigger enterprise?
Yeah, so typically it's two things really. One is size and complexity, and the other one is criticality of the application. So if you're a local authority and your payroll goes down for an hour, nobody dies. if you're an online trading company, so if you think of the people, you know,
Different, right?
here in the UK, for example, you know, we have, you know, the Lloyds Banking Group. Everything is instrumented with this. You've got people like Unilever or Novartis in Switzerland that have got their SAP supply chains that is instrumented by this. And so it's just ensuring that, you know, if that supply chain stops, then the truck driver delivering stuff runs out of hours, therefore the whole plant stops working and escalates.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, those are the main reasons.
Alright.
Okay. Let me escape out of here. Okay, so this is an example. Let me make it just a little bit larger to see. This is the actual product running, and at headquarters. I wanted to share with you. And again, I think you guys can see it. Okay, there's this is an example of a dashboard. This is a specific application, the ordering system dashboard, and you can see a couple things that I wanted to highlight. Number one, on the right-hand side, this is a new construct that we're introducing in 6.0, which is the HTML, the freeform text widget, where you now can put HTML or Markdown code directly in there. So if you need to know, for example, the throat, the choke, in a particular example, you can put their name and their number right here. I mean, this is one example. I'll scroll down just a bit, but this is sort of the summary page. At a glance, you can see am I green, am I yellow, am I red? So we made the color match the severity of things, and they we defined the warning and critical thresholds to be able to define those. You can see over here, we're having a bit of a problem on the host side. So we colored the whole thing red to get your attention. We have an issue here. Another thing we added, and this is a useful one just at a glance, it's the donut chart. Believe it or not, that was one that a lot of folks have asked for. But at a glance, I can see what percent of my infrastructure is 16 gig verse 4 verse 8 at a glance, right? And that's a useful, insightful thing to look at, and you can see how that trends over time. This is another interesting chart, and we typically use it to represent infrastructure pieces. So for this application, on the left-hand side, we've got 6 HBA or host entities, whether it be HBA cards or ports, and we will color it red, green, or yellow, depending upon if there's an alarm on that. So at a glance, I can see right now, we're doing okay for read response on the HBA side, and the same thing on the storage side. And we do that again for write response on both sides. And so these are out-of-the-box template reports that somebody can then customize. And there's, like I said, over 50 of those that you can choose from.
And there's other templates to satisfy the need of accessibility in case colour blindness.
Absolutely. Always take that into consideration when building these. And to the point that I brought up earlier around being able to see analytic output, this is our VM coordinator that said move 5 VMs. And by the way, you can see it's probably right because I have a lot of hosts that are having problems right now. And if I click into there, which we will, we'll see some of those problems and why the VM coordinator actually said we should do something.
But you need a lot of systems to support, right? To get all those, to get the right numbers out of your storage arrays, or it's not only VMware or.
Oh, that's right. So we have VW can expand as large as your infrastructure if you want it to. We have some customers that are software only; they're only VMware and the Fabric. We have some that go all in. They're mounting the storage array, the Fabric, their IP network using NetFlow. They're building applications using our heuristics. I mean, I didn't go into that too much here, but we have.
If a customer comes to you, do you have a lot of custom work to create a dashboard for them like this?
No, that's the great part about this. This dashboard out of the box will work if you have vCenter, for example, the parts that showcase the vCenter stuff, the hosts,
Of course, yeah.
it will light up. Other stuff will say we don't have data for that.
But I can imagine that every customer is different and they have lots of systems
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's why you could customize this to kind of fit your needs. Yeah.
Should I just to extend Marco's question there to a certain degree? how much or how do you avoid the idea of the balloon where, imagine when you're a child and you've got a balloon to squeeze it and a bit pops up, and you can push it back in and another bit pops out, and you can push that in and another bit pops out.
Yeah.
How do you avoid that within the platform where every time you see a problem and you fix it, all you've done is push the issue to another area and it pops up somewhere else for another 10 minutes or another day later, and then so all you're doing is just continually shuffling the issue. How do you actually find a resolution that solves the problem in its entirety?
It's all around understanding the problem completely. So, and I'll give you one example here with the host problem, right? It's understanding what exactly is the problem, right? And in this case, where I'll show you the use case, if you can see, for example, that I'm hitting 80% utilization on this host, our analytics will run a Monte Carlo simulation over we know your last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days of your business patterns. We know, and we can project going forward what your business patterns will be given trends. We can then do Monte Carlo simulations and characterize what, if I shuffle these 5 things, what will that look like? To your point about the balloon, pushing it in one and popping out, we use analytics and machine learning to make sure that doesn't happen. So understanding your business patterns, taking that into consideration when we offer a suggestion to you.
Okay, and then in terms of implementing things like that, when you have potentially many teams that could be all vying for deciding whether they think the problem's theirs or not, or denying everything was ever wrong with their platform. How many companies have got good enough process at that high level to have somebody who's an arbiter who can come in and look at it and actually understand end to end what that problem is, like you've just described, and B, actually work with the teams to help negotiate and solve a problem of that complexity?
A lot of times what we see, and this is actually a common theme across a lot of the larger customers, is the concept of a war room. Have you guys heard of those before? It's where you basically get...
Been in plenty.
It's where you get a big knock, you got experts from the various different parts, and you're not leaving that room until we figured something out.
You call it a war room, I call it a blame room.
Blame room, exactly, and everybody's pointing fingers. This is a slogan you'll see come out as part of the 6.0 launch. It's the end of the war room. And the reason it's the end of the war room is this is your independent arbiter. It shows you exactly where the problems are, where they're rooted in, and how to solve them. And that's exactly where we want to be. So you no longer have to have that confrontational pointing fingers. It's here's where we're seeing the problem, and here's why, and here's how you can solve it.
So, Phil, do you want to just scroll back up a little bit?
Yeah.
So it's just worth going there for
Our
a
new AI
sec.
overlords.
And just scroll down on this just a touch. No, sorry, go back up again. It was actually on this topology view here. So this is how this is how easy this is, right? So we have an auto discovery engine that you fire up, and this will show you the servers, switches, storage, the links between each of those, and so on. But over here, you've got the elements working, and you can see, okay, we've got a problem here. So if you just scroll down on this graphic a little bit, so this is a live demo, here it is. Okay? So immediately, you know it's there. So that's the end of the war room thing. It's like, okay, we can click on this, and we can drill down straight into that and find out what's causing the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can see how you could do that, but a lot of the time, I don't think putting a piece of technology in necessarily gets around that process that an organisation might have for other things, like how they roll out patching, or how they make changes, or how they do their other bits of change control. So a lot of these could be caused just simply by bad process. Now, it may well be that what you're doing is you're highlighting bad process within an organisation by having a platform like this, and that causes them to do something about it. But it does seem to be that you do still have to have somebody who's got a really good overall view of an environment in order to make things work. Maybe that's what people should have. Maybe that's what companies are lacking as well.
Yeah, well, there's always that human element, but there's actually it's one of my favourite things is the head of infrastructure over at Unilever talks about the mean time to innocence, and it's basically he gets an accusation from on high, and he uses this to go, it's not us. So,
is there a kill switch built in just in case it decides to take over your environment and start promoting its own idea of how things should run?
It doesn't work like that. So it doesn't actually make any changes itself. That's a logical progression but actually, would you want us to be
Yeah.
changing your applications and all of that stuff?
To that point a little bit further, I just want to mention, we're not going to orchestrate. We will, if you have an orchestration and you have processes around that level of orchestration, you will manage and control that. But us suggesting something and providing you the backup information as to how we got to that conclusion, that's what we're going to provide it. And so lots of companies, some are very comfortable with moving VMs around. Some are not. Some say, I want to see every single one. And there's a trust that's probably going to have to evolve over time before that's ever going to be completely automated. But the key part is we want to be able to empower the organizations to provide the level of orchestration that they're comfortable with.
But can I compare this with like if you realize Orchestrator, where you can just have a dashboard of your virtual infrastructure with the plugins you might need?
Yeah.
You know, is it a little bit to compare with?
It's a tough comparison because remember, vRealize, their strength is the VM space. They're also not as contextually aware as we're piecing together. I feel like they have certain boundaries where they don't go beyond. We've gone beyond that. And so I think in order to make better answers and better suggestions, you need to have the complete picture. And that's where we've come in and really invested in the depth and the breadth of data to be able to provide that.
And that is, for example, the network or maybe the applications.
Absolutely. Putting the face on the data is absolutely important. Understanding the tier is absolutely important.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, just ending that kind of guesswork into this. So the amount of data we're collecting over 400 metrics at line speed. So one of our probes actually is processing more data in an hour than Twitter will generate in a week. So it's a phenomenal amount of data, but that's actually meaningless to you. It's how we present that back to you. And so giving you all the facts as opposed to, well, I think it's doing that. So we can look at that from each element.
Let's say I'm the admin of this system and some glitch happens. Can you show me where I can go back to the glitch and create like a report on what the RCA would be or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to actually, if it's okay, I'll pop into that part of the product right now.
Yeah.
Because I think that's going to be an interesting spot.
Yeah.
So the launching point for that, we can take something off the dashboard here. Let's go to ESX05 and we can just, click on that. We can go and look at the open alarms, for example, on here. And we have a concept in VW called investigations. And you can see that this specific ESX actually has 4 alarms, 3 of which very related and memory, CPU related. We'll pick one. When I click on it, that stays up because I may want to pop in and look at other investigations before I commit to going into one. And so you can quickly see right now, on this side over here, this is the concept of investigations. This is VI taking 10 plus years of professional services and work and baking it right into the product. And so we know, for example, are there any VMs on this ESX host that have runaway processes? So I can click on that and it will tell me what to look for. Better yet, this one, vSphere cluster imbalanced in CPU utilization is the question. We automatically ran that investigation and we closed it as pertinent. We already figured out the problem and the root cause. Let me click on it and show you the backup evidence behind that. So I'm going to go ahead and say, this looks interesting. VI already found something. I'll click on it. And here, I can take a look at it. It's a critical issue. Common causes of ESX CPU utilization, and there's a checklist. So I can go ahead and I can open this if the product didn't already close it. I could have opened it, started this, and multiple people can log in and actually track what's going on here. It went ahead and ran the VM coordinator. And you can scroll down here and see, this is sort of where that one recommendation came in. It says you can reduce contention by 35% if you shuffle these things again around. And so you get a little bit, I can actually go into that analytic and look at more of the depth of the information if I wanted to, but it's all right here captured in one investigation as to what to do and what the root cause is.
You have start from an alarm and vCenter does not generate an alarm for all the issue. For example, as an extra space, there isn't a predefined alarm for this can you start also from the center events and found potential critical situation or?
Yeah, you're definitely onto something. So as I mentioned before, we're starting to get into the events, pulling events from different components. We started with App Dynamics, absolutely want to go into vCenter. The way we got here in this use case is I knew there was a tier 0 application. I mapped its topology. I automatically set threshold alarms on CPU utilization, memory utilization. And so that was triggered based on VI alarms. But to your point, I want to know if somebody spent the time and went to the effort of configuring vCenter, I should be able to get that information as well and overlay it onto the view that I have. And that's absolutely where we're going.
And this can be a part to make what Chris suggested, to make also a change management, track the change and
Yes.
correlate the change with what can happen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's the first.
Did this answer your question? It did?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
But it's more there should be like a counter for it to be recognized and to have a solution also, of course. Like there's an alarm, so you act on an alarm,
Yeah.
or there are 2 alarms,
Yes.
and that
So
might have a solution that's
we can go here to open cases. So we have a part of the product that's all around aggregating cases. And by the way, we interface with ServiceNow. If that's your single pane of glass for case management, that's perfect. We do that. We'll push it over there. We also have our own, if this is the place you want to manage these. And you can see all of them that happen. And I'll give you an example here. This is a CPU utilization. I'll click on it. And there's a lot of interesting things we actually capture. So one thing we don't do is if the same thing is repeatedly getting hit with an alarm condition, we're not going to create cases for every single one. Instead, it's a little bit tougher to see in this. We can see pretty quickly this CPU utilization. Let's see this red frame. It impacted these applications, 2 plus 8 more. So I can click on this 8 and see who else was impacted by that. And this is all the applications that felt pain because of that CPU utilization. I can see that there were 1,513 occurrences of this alarm over the last 3 days. The last one happened a day ago, and you can't see this because we have lights on it right now, but there's a red threshold line right here, and we're not encountering the problem in the last 2 hours. At a glance, I can see all the information. If I want to see all of the alarms, I can go to the latest alarms. This is all 1,500 and some, if you wanted to see them, but we put them in a single case because we don't want to overwhelm the user. We want to tell the story.
you don't want to have a guy opening and closing cases all day, right?
No, absolutely not. And so this is where you can see all of the different information, right? And so we aggregate them per entities as well, so you can kind of see if there were other related alarms that might have happened, and we pull that information together and link it.
So you got some very capable analysis and drill down into what's the challenge that you're facing? Is it getting this out to the market? Is it persuading people, helping people understand what it's capable of? What was the challenge?
I think in the space we play, we're in 50, 60 of the Fortune 100 customers today. We are moving into some new areas. And so I do want to bring up just real quick, these are some new areas that we are venturing into. Let me make this a little bit smaller. So in addition to the problem resolution, where VI has historically been best in class, we also want to play in capacity management. And that's coming in 6.0 in just a couple weeks. So that's going to be an area of growth for us. Absolutely. There are entire tools that try to do that, and I feel like we do it better. Workload infrastructure balancing. The VM coordinator. We have a storage port coordinator. We want to be able to start looking at ourselves less around a reactionary tool and more of a proactive analytics platform. That's where we're going with this product. And that's a new segment and new messaging that we're working on getting out there. And absolutely all of this is in support of application assurance. Making sure that the SLAs are met, and when they're not, and when they deviate, we can tell you exactly why and how to get around it.
When you say coordinators,
Mhm.
you already said that you're not actually going to take action. Coordinator implies to me taking action. Can you
Sure.
explain a little?
Absolutely. It means, and we have the storage port in the VM, it means we're going to suggest how you can take action.
Oh, so like a correlator rather than a coordinator, sort of thing.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, in this case, let me give you an example, some concrete examples, and maybe we can fill in some of the blanks. In the VM coordinator, as I mentioned, you have an ESX host. It has hundreds of VMs on it. And two VMs might be clashing at a specific point in time because they're both CPU hungry at that time. If I just moved one over because, and you know, this other guy has a very little workload at that particular time, we can avoid all sorts of problems. So it is coordinating. When I say meaning it tells you how to rebalance.
Right.
The storage
Yeah,
port coordinator is more of a rebalancer. I think that's probably a better word and more descriptive. And how to rebalance.
Yeah.
And the key part is, and this is what we see a lot in data centers today, workloads change all the time. New users get added. I do a firmware update and the workload changed. Being able to physically react to that, see it, and then react to it is going to be impossible, and you're always going to be behind the 8 ball. We want the product to be able to see these workload changes and provide you feedback on how to rebalance in reaction to what we're seeing in real time.
So to your question, Brian, of like what are the challenges? Back in the good old days, you know, last week, you could wheel out the chap in a brown coat if things went badly wrong because he understood how everything worked. The new hybrid environment of applications running on the cloud, public cloud, outsourced, on-prem, having all of that lot together, you've got hypervisors, you've got virtual machines, you've got physical servers, you've got applications that arrive, turn up and run for 20 seconds and then disappear forever. All of that is
You're
going
lucky
on.
if you've got someone who understands each element.
Yeah, so now the whole environment is complex beyond human comprehension. So it needs that kind of machine piece. So if you're working it how you've always worked it, then that you're going to have problems. The second issue is actually a human issue, which is every person that's responsible for that infrastructure is absolutely paranoid that the business is going to outsource them tomorrow because they can't see the value. So what we're doing here is we're actually giving those infrastructure people the ammunition, the reports to go back to the senior decision makers that this is what we're doing. We're doing a great job. We're doing a more cost-effective job than anything out there, and we understand the business.
You don't have to be
Right.
cost effective, just have to look like you know what you're doing. Instead of scrabbling around like an artisanal hipster handcrafting wooden rods to keep your infrastructure operational, which is how we do it today, right?
Yeah.
And as we move into hybrid multi-cloud with on-prem, off-prem, up-prem, down-prem,
Yeah.
whatever it is, you can't be across it all anymore. It's just the complexities, we're moving away from bare metal operating systems to virtualization to Kubernetes to serverless.
Yeah.
People are talking about doing FAS or Kubernetes on top of it. You're going to have object stores and fiber channel stores and LUNs and blocks. You're going to have networking. You're going to go, right? You can't do it all yourself. You're going to need an assistance engine, and that's where this intent-based stuff all comes from.
Absolutely.
You
So
have to
if I can see that there's a lot of good stuff here. So what I'm curious is, what are the challenges? Are your current customers, are they happy to take this on? Are they scared of it? What's
Okay, two things. One is, are our customers happy to take this on? Yes, they are. They absolutely want to drive that higher up. Everybody that's looking at it, whether it's the business saying we want to have more transparency over the infrastructure, or the infrastructure people saying we want to feed our business value back up to the business, it works kind of in both directions. The other side of it is, I'm sure as we walked in through the room, for those of you who've known virtual instruments in the past, you would have had a preconceived idea of who those guys are. And that's not what this is. So my job as a marketing person is to get that message out that actually wherever your application is running, if it's on-prem, it's outsourced, or it's running in the cloud, we can give you a single view of your entire environment and all of your environment.
And put a face to that.
Yeah.
To that. And this is an example of one here where we have the application topology on the left, something brand new that we've not done in the past. And you can see then the infrastructure that supports it. And I can then drill in and see that entire infrastructure if I so chose. But I wanted to kind of paint that picture. That's where we're going with this.
So is this almost completely independent of other products? I.e., you could implement this independently
Which
of other virtual instruments products. Can you implement this as a monitoring tool for the infrastructure without any of your
without the application discovery part?
Yeah.
Without-
How
without-
much is this independent of your infrastructure? Because if you're monitoring
Yeah.
multi-environments,
Yep.
you can't assume you're going to have any of your other products in place.
That's right. So it's a platform capability that you can enable.
So you have a completely different sales motion for this than a lot of your other stuff, or
It
the
de-
capability to.
It sometimes depends who you're talking to, right? So if for example, our historical customers in the storage teams, they're still going to use the product the way it has historically been used. But where we're going with this and where we need to market and we want to start penetrating is some of the upstream teams that support the applications directly. And that's exactly
so this
what
is
we've
taking you into new markets,
Absolutely.
new user base, people who would not be familiar with the company, who would not be familiar necessarily with fibre channel monitoring appliances and
Exactly.
things of this kind.
It's exactly.
Storage testing.
So, do you have a joint go-to-market with VMware or Microsoft or anything?
Do we have anything on the horizon I'm allowed to talk about?
It's stuff where, okay, let's say stuff we're allowed to talk about.
Yes.
So we've done the bidirectional integration with AppDynamics. We've got a single integration with Dynatrace going on. We have the major organizations. Some of the interesting things is that we looked at Brocade, getting Brocade data out, but actually we've got a deal with Cisco where Cisco have actually built telemetry into the ASIC of their new 32 gig switch. And the analytics engine on that is this. So we've got a 12-month exclusive with Cisco to provide them with metrics. Now, they are only looking at 30 metrics from that switch. We give 400, right? But those 30 are the ones the customers have been asking for. And so in that environment, you can get some really fascinating, real-time live, at line speed information. Again, in an agentless, heterogeneous environment. So yes, we've got partnerships going off all over the place with this, and we'll let you know them as they are fully signed up.
But your partnerships, most of the time your partnerships, it's with specific people with specific offers, not for all the capabilities of your analytics tool. You know what I mean? That is to say that you don't try in a company through storage or network or whatever you want, and the difficulty is to pursue, to let them believe that you can analyze everything, not only the storage, not only the network, or not only something, and you don't have the right people faced to you.
No, so we can give you a full independent view of the infrastructure. Now, if you want to drill down further than that, actually you could probably talk at some of those partnerships that we're announcing in 6 with the hardware providers and the.
My question was, who is the best people that you have to meet to push only your product on the market?
I think if you look at where.
Well, okay, to answer that question, imagine you are a bank and your trading system stops working. TSB may spring to mind to some of you, but something like that happens. Who's the person that's actually responsible for that? So that may be the infrastructure person, it may be the CIO, it may be the application owner, it may be. So there are multiple people that it could be. And so we're finding and working with those those people. But it's not just a single person. So
Yes.
that
not.
application is running on, servers, hypervisors, virtual machines, switch, fabric, storage, whether that's conventional storage or NAS. It's potentially running in the cloud, AWS, or Azure or Google or wherever it is. So we're having to pull all of those things together to give you that view.
But I think we have an incredible opportunity here. As you looked here, we complement APM quite a bit. APM is instrumenting the application, right? It's an agent that's sitting there looking at all the components. It's measuring queries of individual database transactions. It gives a very different view of the world. Where its blind spot is, if that application, that query takes too long, it doesn't know why. It doesn't know that this other application is a tier 3 that nobody would ever pay money to monitor from an APM perspective is causing that problem. And that's where we come in because we can see the whole view and the whole thing. So I think if you look at opportunity going forward, and this actually gels really well into the vision for the company, is really that partnership of APM and Appleware IPM. And that's essentially those types of folks like Dynatrace and AppDynamics, I think, is we're going to be able to find some really great synergy in that.
So you can see infrastructure level interactions, and they can't.
That's right. Because they're sitting there.
So what is the competition?
Speed?
You bring up a good question on that front, because it's not there's one person that does everything we do and we go after them, we see what their roadmap is and we compete. That's not how we've historically seen competition. What you do see is we're venturing into capacity. There's lots of capacity people out there. That's a new competitor for us in that space. But if you want capacity and you want VI, right, because it's looking at performance, it's doing troubleshooting, it's doing proactive analytics, do you really need that capacity vendor anymore?
How
do we
far
have?
can you go into capacity? Because I was thinking about this the other day, and the one area where it seems to be capacity management. If you're in traditional IT, you know the term. You may well use it, especially if you've got a trad background. One area where I sometimes wonder if they've even ever heard of it is cloud native and things of that kind. A number of stories of people being surprised by the take-up of their whatever infrastructure they provided their devs with and this kind of thing, and something takes off and all of a sudden costs are running out of control. Is that something you can solve? Is that a market that you want to look at? And if it is this the right tool and the right approach for that?
I can tell you one immediate spot that hits home with every single customer. A little bit to what you're saying. But it's around those application teams saying, I need 64 gigs of RAM, I need 8 cores, and then they actually use 8 gigs of RAM and 2 cores. And that by itself, being able to have that visibility, that's absolutely where we're going. We're working on that right now. That's the next evolution of capacity. And then I think you talked about the next one beyond that. And so these are some interesting problems we're looking at. We just started to scratch the surface, and there's lots of interesting use cases in that space.
Selling a vision as much as a product. Starting here, today it's linear regression, statistical regression, correlation, event correlation. Tomorrow it'll be ML, beyond that it's AI.
Exactly.
But ML and AI is years away in practice for operations, because they have to collect enough data to be able to do the analysis to feed into the engines.
Outside limited usage.
Yeah, this is an industry-wide trend, and multiple people are tracking this. This isn't what's unique about this particular product is that these people have all the history of attaching to the network and correlating data from devices. They're actually they're in a unique, and they can churn the existing customer base into this product in theory, which has proven to be quite strong in the infrastructure markets.
But what I'm wondering is the real opportunity here to reach these people who aren't doing this kind of stuff yet? Probably because they don't even know it exists.
Historically, I've been through this a couple of times. So historically, vendors have done a very poor job of selling software. They've been quite happy to sell a box that's very, encapsulated, drop it, and they're like a seagull. They come in, steal the bag of chips, take all the money, poop on everything, and then fly away. And what we're seeing is a transition into the subscription into software models and subscription revenue means that they have to treat you like I'm your friend because you're my rich friend, you've got all the money. And that's a massive transition for these infrastructure companies. Like EMC actually has to love its customer every year. Otherwise, we're not going to rewrite that purchase order in 12 months for a subscription license. These people are well positioned, and these types of this generic family of products, it's about showing you value of this product. How many errors did your storage array throw? How many times did your network drop out? And then using that data to beat the vendor over the head. So I have one customer who's using an analytics-driven WAN monitoring solution, and every time his WAN provider drops below the SLA, he sends him a lawyer's request to issue a refund. And at this point, the WAN provider, and that happens weekly, at this point the WAN provider is now paying him more than he's paying them because he's breaching SLA so often. And he's doing it quite deliberately to get rid of the WAN provider, but it has to be said that this is that is a structural trend. We are now in a position to hold the vendors to account because we have the software tooling to do so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. In fact, we've got a customer up in the north of England that outsourced its entire IT system, but retained the virtual wisdom element of that in-house to keep the outsourcer honest.
Nice.
And so one thing that outsourcers are good at is signing you up to an availability SLA. Now, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a performance SLA. So your on-prem system was giving you a 3 milliseconds response. Are you getting that with your outsourced provider? They don't like offering that as a service.
No,
so
your outsource pretty quickly show up as deficient
so
if
we're
you're
getting
offering.
But it just expanding on your thing. Our CEO actually talks a really good story. We have a customer in the US that is developing autonomous vehicles, and if you think of what is an autonomous vehicle, it's actually a very large, complex monitoring platform. That's all it is. And so, if you think of what we're trying to do here, we're looking at the autonomous data center. That's the vision.
Which is back to the orchestration you were denying earlier.
I'm denying anything.
Okay. Any last questions? I could show this off all day, but I know I'm right between you guys and drinks, so I didn't want to.
I'm still curious how much time it will cost for a big organization to get it the way they want it, to get it customized or tuned so that it's showing whatever they want to.
I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, it comes down to being able to configure the data collectors, right? So I need to be able to interface with these different components, and that requires username, password, and sometimes a certificate if you want to talk to vCenter, for example. But it's really just interface. The app discovery is interesting. So if you have AppDynamics or Dynatrace, it's the same thing, and I'm automatically going to be able to pull your app topology and bind it to the infrastructure. Nothing needs to be done. I'm automatically going to be setting up your alarms on the infrastructure. Now, if you want to customize what we set, that's work. But we're going to do it out of the box. If you don't have an APM vendor, we have custom heuristics to go and discover applications. If you have NetFlow, for example, we see IP conversations. We can use heuristics to figure out what topology is talking to itself. If everybody's talking to this thing over here, it's probably a DNS server. If it's talking on these well-known ports, I can identify that as an app server, a database server. I know this is an Oracle database, for example. I can label it. All this comes for free using our heuristics. So we use NetFlow or a combination of host-based monitoring to figure out those things without you even having to configure an integration.
So are you doing the implementations yourself, or do you have consulting firms doing that, or?
It's all in-house. All in-house.
All in-house.
Yes.
So we have a pretty comprehensive services part of the business. And we're also working with some of the large OEMs and local resellers to develop that service capability even more.
Okay.
So here's a question, maybe a little bit off the wall. So you mentioned you're gathering ginormous amounts of data, telemetry, and then processing it and analyzing it. So what load does your software present to a system?
The great part about that is we're completely out of band for what he is describing about
Oh,
that.
I get you're out of band, but
Yeah.
processing is not free. So you're using resources somewhere to do all this wonderful
Yeah.
stuff.
We sell
Where
a
does that go?
a probe. It's an FPGA based device that sits off a non-powered tap, so it looks at 20% of the light, redirected to us, and we're the ones processing it, calculating those metrics. We calculate the histograms for response time. We send it all back to the Virtual Wisdom appliance. Again, something that we sell.
Okay.
So none of it is on customer hardware. We're not asking
Oh, no,
customer-
I get
Yeah.
that, so, but you sell an appliance to go with it, so.
Yeah,
We
and
do.
we deliberately sell it as an appliance. So a
Understood.
few years back, we actually could say you could load this up on a server somewhere. But we
Right.
found that actually there is budget that people have. So we're
Sure.
talking about the hybrid infrastructure and of clouds and multiple clouds and bursts and all of that stuff. An accounts department is still talking in hardware, software, and services. And somebody buying this doesn't necessarily have the authority to buy a server.
Oh, I get
Whereas
it. I mean, it's
an
easily
appliance, which is the same
consumed.
thing,
Right.
they have the authority to buy that.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. Okay.
So one thing I did want to show, just to kind of showcase some of the topology where we spend a ton of time, this is the topology view, and I just highlighted a couple things. This gives you, if you want to know, for example, this was the ESX5 that we were talking about in debugging just a bit ago. You can see these are the VMAX and Pure storage arrays behind it. This is the vSANs of the fabric. You can see over here is your host. You can see what applications run on it and what their state is, and you can see the tiers it belongs to. Now, what if I want to know, what does this Pure talk to? I click on it. It talks to everything, actually, so that's not a good one. And you can see what gets hid out. So as I hover over something, it will. Oops, having a bit of a problem here. Actually, I think because all these talk to everything. Let's pick another one. So let me just add one more. So you can do multi. X06. Can add this one, for example, as well. So you can kind of start to layer on different entities and see how they relate and what common things they talk to. And I'll just bring this down a bit. These are the different views I was referring to. So if I just wanted to look at the virtualization side, I can click on the VM side. It's just going to show me, it's going to compress this down to the VM side. But I want to look at the entire end-to-end. So I have this here. If I want to see, for example, I'll highlight over this. You can see, I don't know if it's easy to see, but all the components that don't talk to this thing I'm hovered over right now, gray out. So you can quickly at a glance, just by hovering over things, see how things are connected. And it becomes that, I think if anybody wants to debug a very complicated environment, you have to have a good map. This is the map.
Okay.
Okay. So, Turbonomic, like VM Turbo, is it like a direct competitor for you?
It will be.
It will be.
It will be. So Turbonomics does orchestration for vMotion, kind of like what I just mentioned. We'll allow you to download the script. We don't actually do it. Turbonomics will do it.
Yeah.
Let me give you some input as to what we've heard from customers around Turbonomics. It will move VMs during times when the VMs are actively being used. So that poses a problem. That application or somebody's actually using that VM, all of a sudden it goes offline. We're aiming to do that better. We're gonna basically go making sure we understand the business patterns of usage for that VM before we offer the suggestion to move things. And so we are absolutely going directly at that.
Proactive stuff is something that's the new version for
That's right.
you. Yeah.
Yes, Virtual Wisdom 6, which will be out in about the next 4 to 6 weeks.
So
Make also capacity planning.
They do.
Okay.
And you'll notice a lot of what we're going after right now taps their wheelhouse.
Yeah. And I also know they have like a zillion specific brands they support, and is it comparable? Like all the storage arrays that exist, they have to write specific interface for to monitor them. And is it? Can I see it like that, or
Are you talking about Turbonomics?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see how you connect to all these
Sure.
different
We use
devices,
public interfaces. So let me give you a couple examples. Brocade, for example, uses SNMP. They have an SNMP interface that never changes. vCenter uses their own.
For example, you have a pure storage, and you want to know what the IOPS are, and
They have a RESTful interface.
yeah, exactly. And so you write a specific code to support a pure array.
Yeah, now let me give you, so I'm glad you brought this up. We've spent the last 9 months in something that's not terribly sexy. It's the re-architecting of some of the back end to decouple the core of the product from the data collection layer. And what that allows us to do is, let me give you an example. In 6.0, we'll release these capabilities that I showed the data collectors we have. Let's say in 2 months, I've created another data collector, let's call Pure. Not to say we are in 2 months, but I could. And then I could download that package and insert it into Virtual Wisdom 6.0, and all of a sudden it can speak Pure.
Okay.
And so we've invested heavily in the ability to accelerate our ability to see different environments without having to do a software version update.
Yeah. You have to
It's like
because of the
Marguerite.
diversity.
Like a Marguerite.
Yes,
Proper.
that's right.
Just the
So-
core and all the petals.
That's right.
And then now with the petals.
The key is we need to know how it's connected to our core object model. But if for example, we can say these are the extension points into these certain entities that we know about, then all of a sudden we can start to tie that in really quick.
Yeah. So can I write my own?
We're getting there. So we built an SDK. I think we're going to do a crawl, walk, run on this one.
Yes.
Right? We're at the crawl stage. I'd like to see it work. I'd like for us to do it to get to the walk stage, and then we're going to open it up a bit more.
The market's changing. The days of, only need to provide an interface to EMC and NetApp and cover 95% of the market, that's gone.
Yeah.
Right?
Customers have multiple storage arrays from multiple vendors, not just Pure, but, there's so many storage companies you can barely count them.
You're right.
There's 70 SD-WAN companies for managing branch networks. There's 20 vendors now inside of data center switching. If you start counting white box and open source operating systems, right? Once upon a time, Cisco had 85% of the data center switching market. Now it's like under 60. So you can't just make data collection for just one thing anymore because customers' diversity is expanding. And now you've got cloud,
Yes.
and the clouds are iterating very rapidly. If you're in the public clouds, the off-prem clouds, you have to have a different architecture if you're into analytics engines.
So that's exactly why you need an independent
Yes.
view, and that's what we're doing. We're giving you an independent view, regardless of what that infrastructure is. So I'm very wary that we're running a little bit over our allocated thing. So just to round out, the new 6.0 product is the Virtual Wisdom 6.0 is being announced on Tuesday. 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.
UK time.
Yeah.
And so you will get the press release probably ahead of that, so that Fred will send you over that release. And it's quite a long release, this one. So it actually talks about the new direction that we're going in, the ending of the war room. And so on, but then goes into the functionality that's going to be additional to this product over and above the existing product. So hopefully you'll be able to do something with that.
New roadmaps, new strategy, new everything.
You've basically heard that here. So the direction we're going in is basically in line with what the rest of the world is doing.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.